You may keep my name, but you will surrender my house. The Duke of Ravenshire spoke, without raising his voice. He did not need to. Every servant in the entrance hall heard him place Eleanor's household keys into Lady Cecily Harcourt's waiting hand. The silver ring of keys gave a small, bright chime. For 4 years, that sound had summoned housemaids, opened storerooms, released medicine during midnight fevers, and unlocked the grain chambers whenever winter left a tenant hungry. Now, Cecily curled her gloved fingers around the keys, as though accepting a bouquet. Eleanor looked at her husband. You have given Lady Cecily authority over Ravenshire House. Julian's expression remained cold. I have relieved you of a burden you were never meant to carry. And what burden is that? Pretending to be its duchess. A footman lowered his eyes. Mrs. Mercer, the housekeeper, gripped the edge of her apron. Eleanor felt the humiliation move through the hall like a blade, but she refused to bleed where Cecily could see it. 4 years earlier, her brother Thomas had died in Julian's arms on a battlefield in France. His final request had been simple: protect Eleanor. Julian had honoured it by marrying the quiet, unwanted sister no other nobleman had chosen. He had given her his title, his name, and a bedroom at the opposite end of the house. Nothing more. Eleanor turned to Cecily. The widow wore crimson silk and the faint smile of a woman entering a room she had measured long before the door was opened. Do you understand what those keys govern? Eleanor asked. Cecily's smile sharpened. A household, your grace, hardly a kingdom. No. 47 servants, 6 winter stores, the tenant's medicine cabinet, and every expenditure made in the Duke's name. Julian stepped between them. That is enough. Eleanor met his gaze. Then ask her where the western grain key is. Cecily glanced down at the silver ring. Julian's jaw tightened. This childish examination proves nothing. It proves she does not know that the western grain key was removed 3 months ago after someone attempted to open the storehouse at midnight. A murmur passed among the servants. Cecily recovered quickly. And did you inform your husband of this alleged intrusion? I wrote to him twice. Julian's eyes flickered, but only for an instant. He had been in London with Cecily when those letters arrived. He had returned them unopened, each bearing the same instruction in his secretary's hand. The Duke does not wish to be troubled with household matters. Now he said, you have mistaken secrecy for competence. Eleanor almost laughed. Instead, she slipped her wedding ring from her finger. Julian stared at the pale mark it left behind. I will surrender the house, she said, but I will not remain inside it as Lady Cecily's ornament. She crossed the marble floor and placed the ring in his palm. For the first time, his composure cracked. What are you doing? Returning the only thing you ever gave me personally. Something tightened in his face. You cannot abandon your position because your pride has been wounded. My pride survived 4 years of empty dinners and unanswered letters. It will survive this. Mrs. Mercer took an involuntary step toward her, but Eleanor stopped her with a gentle shake of the head. I request a formal separation, Eleanor continued. My solicitor has prepared the terms. I will leave Ravenshire before midnight. Julian closed his fingers around the ring. You have no independent fortune. No family willing to receive you. No, and no understanding of what the world does to a woman who walks away from a duke. Eleanor held his gaze. I understand what staying has done to me. Silence settled over the hall. Cecily moved closer to Julian. Let her go. A few nights without Ravenshire's comforts may restore her gratitude. The words struck deeper than Eleanor wished to admit. Not because they were cruel, but because Julian did not contradict them. He looked at the woman he had married for his dead friend's sake, and saw an obligation threatening to become inconvenient. Very well, he said. Go. Eleanor nodded once. She left without looking back. At 11 that night, a single hired carriage waited beneath the front steps. Eleanor carried one trunk, Thomas's final letter, and the account book she had purchased with her own pin money. Everything bearing the Ravenshire crest remained behind. Mrs. Mercer stood beside the carriage with tears in her eyes. What will happen when the northern rents are due? The housekeeper whispered. The deposits will continue for 6 days, and after that, His Grace will have to discover who has been paying them. Eleanor climbed into the carriage. From an upstairs window, Julian watched her depart. He told himself that she would return before morning. Eleanor had nowhere else to go, and women without money could not afford principles for long. Yet dawn came without her. At 8, the estate steward arrived carrying 3 unopened notices. At 9, the mill workers refused to release flour. At 10, the tenant relief accounts were frozen by a London bank Julian had never heard of. At 11, a black royal carriage stopped before Ravenshire House. A Crown inspector stepped out and demanded financial records covering the previous 4 years. "Fetch the Duchess," Julian ordered. Mrs. Mercer looked directly at him. "The Duchess no longer lives here, Your Grace." For the first time, Julian opened the hand that had remained clenched since Eleanor's departure. Her wedding ring lay against his palm. Only it was not the ring he had given her. Julian carried the ring to the window. It was the same size as Eleanor's wedding band and bore the same Ravenshire crest, but the gold had darkened with age. A thin crack ran through the engraved raven. "Where did she obtain this?" he asked. Mrs. Mercer remained near the door. "I do not know, Your Grace." Julian turned the ring between his fingers. 4 years earlier, he had placed a new band on Eleanor's hand before a nearly empty chapel. This ring was at least 20 years old. A knock interrupted him. The Crown inspector entered without waiting for permission. He was a narrow-faced man named Mr. Calder, dressed in black and carrying a sealed leather case. "Your Grace, I require the household relief accounts, the northern tenancy agreements, and every record concerning the Crown grain subsidy." Julian set the ring on his desk. "My steward will provide them." The steward's face turned pale. "Her Grace kept those records." "Then find them." "I have searched her office. The cabinets are empty." Julian looked at him sharply. "Are you accusing my wife of stealing estate documents?" "No, Your Grace. The cabinets were never used." Mr. Calder removed a folded notice from his case. "That is because the Duchess deposited all official copies with the Crown Registry. She did so after reporting irregular withdrawals from the subsidy." Julian read the notice twice. "Why was I not informed?" "You were," Calder replied. 3 letters were delivered to your London residence. Each was returned unopened. Cecily entered before Julian could answer. She wore Eleanor's household keys at her waist. Their bright chime cut through the room. "Julian, the cook refuses to accept my instructions, and Mrs. Mercer has ordered the servants not to open the eastern storeroom." "I ordered no such thing," Mrs. Mercer said. "The key does not fit." Cecily removed the ring of keys and searched through it. "They all appear identical." "They are not," said the steward. 2 have been replaced." Calder extended his hand. "May I examine them?" Cecily hesitated. Julian noticed. "Give them to him." Calder tested the weight of 2 keys and scraped one with the edge of a coin. A reddish colour appeared beneath the silver coating. "Copper," he said, "recently cast." Julian's attention shifted to Cecily. "Where did these come from?" "How should I know?" Eleanor handed me the keys. "No," Mrs. Mercer said. "His Grace took them from the Duchess and placed them in your hand." Cecily's cheeks coloured. "You dare correct me? I remember what I witnessed." Julian raised one hand before the argument could continue. "What is stored in the eastern room?" "Winter medicine," Mrs. Mercer answered, "and the receipts for its purchase." Calder closed his leather case. "No one is to enter that room until I return with a magistrate." Cecily's voice sharpened. "You cannot treat this house like the scene of a crime." "I can when someone has replaced its keys." Calder turned to Julian. "You have until tomorrow morning to produce the Duchess and the original accounts. If the subsidy cannot be traced, the Crown will suspend every payment made to Ravenshire." After he left, Julian ordered the steward to search Eleanor's former rooms. They found 6 dresses, 2 pairs of worn shoes, and an empty writing desk. She had taken none of the jewels assigned to the Duchess. Even the pearl necklace Julian had given her after their wedding remained unopened in its case. Mrs. Mercer lifted a stack of household menus from the desk. Beneath them lay dozens of letters bearing Julian's seal. Every one had been written by Eleanor. Every one had been returned unread. Julian opened the first. "The northern mill requires immediate repair. If it fails before harvest, 12 villages will lose their flour supply." The second warned that the estate physician had charged twice for medicine never delivered. The third contained the names of tenants whose rents had been paid from an account Eleanor called the Hartwell Trust. Julian lowered the letter. "What is the Hartwell Trust?" Mrs. Mercer looked at him with open disbelief. "The last of her brother's inheritance." Julian's hand tightened around the paper. "Thomas left her almost nothing. He left her £200. Her Grace invested it. That could not support half the northern estate. It did not at first. She spent 4 years building it. Julian walked to the window. Beyond the glass, carts stood motionless near the mill road. Tenants had gathered at the gates, but none called for the Duke. They were asking for Eleanor. She never told me, he said. Mrs. Mercer placed the unopened letters before him. She tried. Eleanor spent her first morning away from Ravenshire in a modest house beside the village school. The cottage belonged to Miss Agnes Bell, her former governess, and the only person who had answered when Eleanor wrote that she might need shelter. Agnes poured tea while Eleanor studied a row of figures in her account book. You have enough money for 6 weeks, Agnes said. 8 if I dismiss the hired carriage. And after 8 weeks, I find employment. You are a duchess. Today that is a title. In 8 weeks it may be merely an inconvenience. Eleanor tried to smile, but her hand began trembling around the pen. Agnes covered it with her own. You are allowed to grieve. I am not grieving for Julian. No? Eleanor looked down at the pale circle left by her wedding band. I am grieving for the woman who spent 4 years believing that patience would eventually be mistaken for worth. A hard knock sounded at the door. Eleanor stiffened. A young mill worker stood outside, mud covering his boots. He held a flour sack marked with the Ravenshire crest. Your Grace, the mill has stopped. Why? Lady Cecily ordered the grain released, but the new key broke inside the lock. Then, we found this hidden behind the loading wall. He opened the sack. It did not contain flour. Dozens of sealed medicine bottles rolled across Agnes's table. Each bore a label claiming it had been delivered to the eastern storeroom months earlier. Eleanor picked up one bottle. The wax around its stopper was fresh. These were never sent to Ravenshire, she said. The worker swallowed. There is something else. He handed her a torn delivery receipt. At the bottom was a signature written in Eleanor's name. It was dated 3 days after she had left the estate. Eleanor held the receipt near the window. At first glance, the signature resembled hers. The capital E curved inward, and the final stroke beneath Hartwell rose toward the right. Yet the writer had made one mistake. They copied my name from an old tenancy agreement, she said. Agnes examined the receipt. How can you tell? I stopped signing Hartwell after my marriage. On estate documents, I sign Eleanor Ravenshire. The mill worker shifted uneasily. Then someone forged it? Yes, but that is not the strangest part. Eleanor placed the receipt beside the medicine bottle. The date says these bottles were delivered 3 days after I left. Whoever wrote this expected the eastern storeroom to be opened after my departure, to make it appear that you arranged the delivery, or that I stole what was supposed to be inside. She broke the wax seal and removed the stopper. The bottle contained no medicine. A thin layer of sugar water coated its bottom. How many bottles were hidden at the mill? 2 sacks, Your Grace. 2. Did anyone else see them? Only Mr. Shaw, the mill foreman. Return immediately. Tell him to lock the room and admit no one. Do not carry the second sack here. The worker nodded, then paused. The Duke's steward has already sent men to search the mill. Eleanor rose. Did you tell anyone where you were going? No. Then leave through the schoolyard. Agnes will show you the back gate. When the door closed, Eleanor wrapped the forged receipt in clean cloth. Agnes watched her carefully. You knew something was wrong before you left Ravenshire. I knew medicine payments had doubled. I knew grain disappeared from the subsidy account. I did not know the two were connected. And Lady Cecily, I cannot accuse her without proof. You may not have time to wait for proof. Eleanor looked toward the distant towers of Ravenshire House. No, but Julian must. At the estate, Cecily stood before the eastern storeroom, while 2 footmen attempted to remove the broken key. Break the door, she ordered. Mrs. Mercer stepped between them. The Crown Inspector forbade anyone from entering. The inspector is not mistress of this house. Neither were you when those keys were replaced. Cecily's hand moved as though she might strike her. Before she could, Julian entered the corridor. What is happening? Your servants are defying me, Cecily said. If you expect me to manage this household, you must give me authority to do so. Julian looked at the damaged lock. Who ordered the storeroom opened? I did. The physician requires supplies. Mr. Calder sealed this room. And you intend to let a clerk command you inside your own home? The challenge struck exactly where Cecily intended. Julian had spent years resenting officials who treated his title as an ornament and his estate as a source of revenue. She knew how easily wounded pride could be made to resemble courage. "Open it," he ordered. Mrs. Mercer stared at him. "Your Grace, that is my decision." A footman brought an iron bar. After 3 blows, the lock split. The door swung inward. The shelves were almost empty. Only 12 medicine bottles remained, arranged in a perfect row. Beneath them stood a wooden chest bearing Eleanor's initials. Cecily released a quiet breath. Julian heard it. "What did you expect us to find?" "Whatever your wife concealed." The chest was locked, but the broken copper key still protruded from the door. Julian removed it and tried it against the chest. It fit. Inside lay packets of banknotes, several Crown subsidy vouchers, and a ledger bearing Eleanor's name. Mrs. Mercer covered her mouth. Cecily moved beside Julian. "She stole from you." Julian opened the ledger. Each page recorded money transferred from the grain subsidy into an account controlled by Eleanor. The final entry had been made the day before her departure. "Send for the magistrate," Cecily said. Julian did not move. 4 years of suspicion, distance, and resentment told him the evidence was plain. Eleanor had controlled the accounts. Eleanor had hidden money. Eleanor had left before the Crown arrived. But another memory intruded. Eleanor, standing in the entrance hall, calmly asking Cecily to identify the Western grain key. She had known the keys were wrong. Why would a thief reveal that? Julian. He looked at the chest again. The copper key had opened it too easily. Before he could answer, hoofbeats sounded in the courtyard. Mr. Calder returned with a magistrate and 2 Crown officers. His expression hardened when he saw the shattered door. "I gave explicit instructions that this room remain sealed." "I will not be forbidden from entering my own storeroom," Julian replied. Calder looked past him at the open chest. "And by breaking the seal, you have destroyed the legal integrity of whatever was placed inside." Cecily stepped forward. "The Duchess's stolen money is in that chest." "Was anyone present when the chest was discovered?" "The Duke, 3 servants, and I." "Who possessed the keys before today?" Cecily glanced at Julian. Calder noticed. "You did, Lady Cecily. For less than 1 day. 1 day is sufficient to place a chest in an unlocked room. How dare you accuse me?" "I accuse no one. I stated that the evidence can no longer prove who placed it here." Julian felt the full weight of his mistake. Calder had ordered the room preserved, and Julian had allowed Cecily to provoke him into opening it. The magistrate lifted the ledger carefully. "There may still be enough to issue a warrant." "For whom?" Julian asked. "The Duchess of Ravenshire." "No." The word escaped before Julian could consider it. Cecily turned toward him. "You have the proof in your hands." "I have a chest opened by a false key and a ledger found after I ignored a Crown order." "You cannot still defend her." Julian stared at Eleanor's name on the cover. Yesterday, he would not have defended her. He had not defended her for 4 years. But he had finally read her letters. "Find my wife," he told the steward. "Bring her here before the magistrate issues anything." At the village cottage, Eleanor heard a carriage stop outside. She hid the receipt inside Thomas's old prayer book and instructed Agnes to keep the medicine bottle out of sight. The door opened. Julian entered alone. For several seconds, neither spoke. His gaze fell to Eleanor's bare hand. Something passed across his face, but she no longer wished to interpret it. "You must return to Ravenshire," he said. "No. A chest containing stolen Crown money has been found in your storeroom. It was never my storeroom. The eastern room belonged to the estate physician. It bears your initials. Then someone wished you to find it." His jaw tightened. "The magistrate may issue a warrant for your arrest." "And you came to warn me?" "I came to give you an opportunity to explain." Eleanor stepped closer. "I wrote to you 16 times. You returned every letter unopened. You removed my authority before the household and handed my keys to Lady Cecily. Then you ordered me to leave." "I did not order you to leave. You made remaining impossible." Julian had no answer. Eleanor opened the door. "You may tell the magistrate I will appear voluntarily tomorrow. You cannot remain here tonight. If you are arrested publicly, my reputation will suffer." Her quiet laugh wounded him more deeply than anger. "You should have considered my reputation before placing another woman above me in my own home." Julian reached for her, then stopped before touching her arm. "Eleanor, I am trying to protect you." "No, you are trying to control what happens after you failed to protect me." She waited until he stepped outside, then closed the door. Julian stood alone beneath the darkening sky. From inside the cottage, He heard Agnes slide the bolt into place. He had believed Eleanor would return once she understood how little she possessed without him. Instead, for the first time in 4 years, she had looked at him without hope. A rider appeared at the end of the lane before Julian reached his carriage. The man carried an urgent message from Ravenshire. The northern mill was burning, and Eleanor's former steward was trapped inside with the only unopened sack of medicine bottles. Eleanor reached the mill before Julian. Flames had already consumed the western loading wall. Villagers formed a line from the river, passing buckets toward men whose faces were blackened by smoke. "The steward is still inside," someone shouted. Eleanor caught the mill foreman by the sleeve. "Where was he last seen?" "Near the records room. He went back for the second sack. The records room has no outside window. I tried to stop him. A burning beam collapsed behind them. Sparks scattered across the road, and the villagers retreated." Eleanor looked toward the mill race. Water still rushed beneath the eastern wheel, but the wheel had stopped turning. "Why is the sluice gate closed?" "The Duke's steward ordered it shut this morning." "Open it. If we release the water, it will flood the lower floor. That is exactly what we need." The foreman hesitated. "The grain stored below will be ruined." "The grain is already lost if the mill burns." Eleanor seized the release lever, but it did not move. 2 workers joined her. Together they forced it downward. Water roared through the channel. The mill wheel turned once, shuddered, then began to rotate. Inside the building, the old emergency pump came alive. Water burst through iron pipes. Eleanor had ordered, repaired the previous spring. "Direct the upper nozzles toward the records room," she called. The workers pulled the valves. A stream struck the burning staircase, clearing a narrow path through the smoke. Eleanor tied a wet cloth over her mouth. The foreman blocked her. "You cannot go inside. I know the floor plan." "So do I." "Then come with me." They entered together. Heat struck Eleanor's face. Smoke erased the corridor beyond a few feet, but she counted the support posts by touch. The steward lay beneath a fallen shelf near the records room. One leg was trapped, and his hands were wrapped around the missing sack of bottles. "Leave it," Eleanor ordered. He shook his head. "They burned the other records. This is all that remains. The bottles are not worth your life. They prove you did not steal them." Eleanor knelt beside the fallen shelf. "Then stay alive long enough to say where you found them." With the foreman's help, she lifted the timber. The steward pulled free, crying out as he dragged his injured leg behind him. Another beam cracked above them. The foreman carried the steward toward the exit. Eleanor lifted the sack, but its bottom tore. Bottles rolled across the floor. She reached for the nearest one. A section of burning ceiling fell between her and the doorway. "Eleanor," Julian's voice came through the smoke. He appeared beyond the flames, coat discarded, and one sleeve wrapped across his mouth. "Stay where you are," he shouted. She almost laughed at the absurdity of the command. "The eastern passage," she called. "Open the lower gate." Julian disappeared. A moment later, water surged across the floor. It struck Eleanor's ankles, then rose to her knees, smothering the fire between them. Julian crossed the flooded passage and caught her arm. "We have to leave." "The receipt." "I have it." He held up a scorched piece of paper he had taken from beside one of the bottles. Eleanor allowed him to guide her through the smoke. They emerged as the mill roof collapsed behind them. For one brief moment, Julian held her against him. His hand pressed to the back of her head, while he drew a shaking breath. Then Eleanor stepped away. "See to the steward." Julian's arms fell to his sides. The injured man had been placed on a cart. One of his legs was badly burned, but he remained conscious. Mr. Calder arrived with the magistrate, while the villagers fought the last of the flames. "What happened?" Calder demanded. Cecily's carriage stopped behind him. She descended before anyone could answer. "The Duchess set the fire to destroy the evidence," she declared. The villagers fell silent. Julian looked at Cecily. Eleanor was inside the mill, because she knew what was hidden there. She entered to save my steward, or to recover the forged receipts before they were discovered. Eleanor turned to the injured man. "Tell them where you found the bottles." The steward tried to speak, but pain twisted his face. The physician pushed everyone back. "He requires immediate treatment." Cecily pointed toward the sack. "Those bottles bear the Duchess's signature." "The signature is false," Eleanor said. "Convenient." Julian unfolded the scorched receipt. "It is signed Eleanor Hartwell." Cecily lifted her chin. Her own name. She has signed estate documents as Eleanor Ravenshire since our marriage. A shadow crossed Cecily's face. Eleanor saw it. So did Calder. Who told you the receipt bore her name? The inspector asked. Cecily's lips parted. I assumed it. The sack remained inside the burning mill until a few minutes ago. The workers were speaking of it. No one mentioned the signature. Cecily turned to Julian. Are you going to permit a government clerk to interrogate me before labourers? Julian looked at the woman he had once believed he loved. Then he looked at Eleanor, her wet dress stained with soot and one hand blistered from the fire. You will answer him. Cecily's expression hardened. I was informed by the estate physician. He discovered the irregular deliveries weeks ago. Why did he not report them? Eleanor asked. He feared you. Then he can give evidence tomorrow. He has gone to London. When? This afternoon. Eleanor glanced at the mill. The fire had started shortly after the physician supposedly departed. Calder ordered an officer to secure every bottle that had survived. Only 7 remained unbroken. Eleanor crouched beside them. 6 carried identical paper labels. The 7th was different. Its label had darkened with age, and the wax around its stopper bore the original mark of the Ravenshire apothecary. She lifted it carefully. This one was delivered last winter. How can you know? Julian asked. The apothecary changed his seal in January. The raven on the old seal faced left. Cecily gave a dismissive laugh. A bird facing in another direction proves nothing. Perhaps not, but the contents may. Eleanor poured a single drop onto a clean silver spoon. The liquid left a blue stain. This is fever medicine. The others contain sugar water. Calder compared the labels. All 7 claimed to come from the same delivery. Then someone kept one genuine bottle as a model, Eleanor said, and created the others afterward. The injured steward stirred on the cart. Not afterward, he whispered. Everyone turned. He reached inside his scorched coat and withdrew a small brass stamp. I found this beneath the false labels. Eleanor took it from him. The stamp bore the initials E.H., the same initials carved into the chest discovered in the eastern storeroom. Julian stared at it. Eleanor Hartwell. No, Eleanor said. She wiped soot from the lower edge, revealing a third, smaller letter. E.H.C. Cecily Harcourt's full name, before her first marriage, had been Evelyn Harcourt Carrington. Cecily went completely still. The magistrate reached for the stamp, but Julian closed his hand around it first. He had been given another chance to choose between an accusation and the truth. Then Cecily spoke softly enough for only him to hear. If you hand that to Calder, I will tell him what Thomas was really doing in France and why Eleanor married you before his body was cold. Julian's fingers tightened around the brass stamp. Thomas Hartwell had been his closest friend, the man who had dragged him from a burning gun carriage and carried him half a mile with a shattered shoulder. Julian had promised to protect Thomas's sister before blood filled his friend's lungs. Now Cecily was threatening to stain the dead man's name before the crown. What are you suggesting? Julian asked. Cecily's eyes remained on the stamp. Thomas was not merely a soldier. He carried messages between officers who were selling military supplies to the French. That is a lie. Then give the stamp to Calder. Once he investigates its initials, I will give him the letters Thomas sent my first husband. Eleanor stood several feet away. She could not hear Cecily's whispered words, but she saw Julian's expression change. He looked at the stamp, then he slipped it into his coat. Eleanor felt something inside her. Go still. Mr. Calder extended his hand. The object, Your Grace. Julian faced him. It is too damaged to identify. Eleanor stepped closer. I identified it. You made an assumption. The initials were visible. Smoke and heat can distort metal. Cecily lowered her eyes to conceal her satisfaction. Calder studied Julian. Are you refusing to surrender evidence in a Crown investigation? I am refusing to let a meaningless object be used to accuse a guest beneath my protection. Eleanor stared at her husband. A guest beneath your protection, she repeated. The words carried no anger. That made them worse. Julian could have asked her what she knew. He could have shown her the stamp or mentioned Thomas's name. Instead, he had chosen secrecy again and placed Cecily's safety above hers in front of the same people who had watched him strip away her authority. The magistrate opened his case. Without the stamp, we still have the chest, the ledger, and receipts bearing the Duchess's former name. I must request that she remain available for questioning. I have already agreed to appear tomorrow, Eleanor said. Cecily turned toward the burned mill. By tomorrow, how much more evidence will disappear? Julian said nothing. That silence gave the magistrate permission. Your Grace, I cannot allow you to leave the district. Eleanor looked directly at Julian. Is that your decision as well? His mouth tightened. It is a reasonable precaution. A precaution against me? Until the accounts are examined. She waited for him to say more. He did not. Then examine them, she said, but you will do it without my labour, my silence, or my trust. Eleanor walked toward Agnes's waiting cart. Julian followed. You do not understand what is at stake. She turned so suddenly that he nearly collided with her. No, Julian, I understand it perfectly. Lady Cecily whispered something, and within seconds you concealed evidence and permitted a magistrate to restrict my freedom. I am trying to prevent a larger scandal. You always call it protection when you are protecting someone else from the consequences of harming me. His face hardened. This concerns your brother. Eleanor froze. Julian immediately regretted the words, but he could not take them back. What about Thomas? Not here. You invoked my dead brother to justify withholding evidence. You will answer me here. Cecily watched from beside the magistrate. Julian lowered his voice. She claims Thomas was involved in selling military supplies to the enemy. Eleanor's face lost all colour. And you believed her? No, but you concealed the stamp. I need time to learn what she possesses. You had 4 years to learn what I possessed. You never opened a letter. You never opened a letter. That is not the same. It is exactly the same. Eleanor stepped back. Thomas discovered stolen military supplies. He was gathering proof against the officers responsible. He wrote to me because he no longer trusted the official couriers. Julian's anger faltered. Why did you never tell me? I tried on the night we married. A memory returned with brutal clarity. Eleanor had approached him after the wedding supper, carrying a bundle of letters tied with faded blue ribbon. Julian had been half drunk with grief. He had told her that marrying her fulfilled his promise and that he wanted nothing else connected to Thomas's death. She had quietly taken the letters away. What did those letters contain? He asked. The reason Thomas was killed. Cecily began walking toward them. Eleanor saw her and lowered her voice. Your former beloved knows more about my brother's death than she should. Yet when given proof that connects her to the forged records, you hid it for her. I hid nothing for her. The stamp is in your coat. Julian had no answer. Eleanor climbed onto the cart. Where are Thomas's letters now? Somewhere, Lady Cecily cannot reach them. The cart moved away. Julian watched until the smoke swallowed it. That evening, the magistrate summoned Julian to Ravenshire's library. Calder stood beside the desk with an official order. Until the missing subsidy is recovered, the Crown will seize control of the Northern estate accounts. Julian read the document. That will stop tenant payments. It will also prevent further theft. The harvest begins in 9 days. Then produce authentic records before then. Cecily sat near the fire, one hand resting on the household keys. The Duchess knows where the money went. Julian ignored her. Calder placed a second document on the desk. This authorizes a search of the cottage where she is staying. Julian looked up. On whose evidence? The ledger discovered in the eastern storeroom. Evidence you said had been compromised. Compromised does not mean worthless. A search may establish whether the Duchess retained original records or stolen funds. Cecily rose. If she is innocent, she has nothing to fear. Julian remembered Eleanor's bare hand and the hopelessness in her eyes. He also remembered Thomas bleeding beneath the French sky, forcing Julian to swear that no disgrace would ever reach his sister. If Thomas's letters were found by the Crown, the accusation of treason could become public before its truth was tested. Julian picked up the authorization. Let me conduct the search privately. Calder shook his head. Impossible. Then delay until morning. The magistrate requires your signature tonight, because the cottage stands on Ravenshire land. The pen waited beside the order. Julian knew Eleanor would view the search as another betrayal. But if he refused, Calder might appeal directly to the Crown and seize everything without warning. He told himself he was choosing the lesser harm. He signed. Near midnight, officers surrounded Agnes Bell's cottage. Eleanor woke to fists, striking the door. She opened it before they could break the lock. The magistrate entered, carrying Julian's authorization. You are required to surrender every estate record and all correspondence belonging to Thomas Hartwell. Eleanor read her husband's signature at the bottom of the page. For the first time since leaving Ravenshire, her composure broke, not with tears, with certainty. She removed the chain from her neck. A small iron key hung from it. Agnes stared at her. "Eleanor, what are you doing?" "What I should have done before I married him." Eleanor gave the key to the magistrate. "It opens a deposit box at the Crown Registry. Inside you will find every letter my brother sent me." The magistrate reached for it. Eleanor closed her hand around his wrist. "But you will also find a sealed statement explaining that if those letters are opened under the Duke of Ravenshire's authority, his marriage was used to suppress evidence of treason." Ah, the magistrate's expression changed. Outside, hoofbeats approached. Julian entered the cottage and saw the key in the officer's hand. Eleanor looked at him across the room. "You wish to avoid a scandal," she said. "By sunrise, you will be standing at the centre of one." The magistrate ordered the cottage cleared. Agnes refused to leave Eleanor until 2 officers escorted her into the garden. Julian remained near the door, while Mr. Calder placed the iron key inside an evidence envelope. "You said nothing about a sealed statement," Julian said. "You never asked what my brother entrusted to me." "I asked you tonight, after signing an order to search my room. I signed it to prevent the Crown from acting without warning." Eleanor glanced at the officer's opening drawers behind him. "Your warning arrived with armed men." The magistrate returned from the adjoining room, carrying Thomas's prayer book. He opened it and removed the forged medicine receipt. "This was concealed inside." "It was preserved," Eleanor corrected. "The mill worker gave it to me before the fire." Calder examined the signature. "It is dated 3 days after the Duchess left Ravenshire." "Which proves someone else wrote it," Julian said. "It proves the date is false," the magistrate replied. "It does not prove when the signature was added." Julian's frustration rose. "You have a receipt that could not have been signed on the date it bears, false keys, imitation medicine, and a burned mill. Yet you continue to treat my wife as the principal suspect." Eleanor looked at him. It was the first time he had called her his wife since taking away her keys. The word came too late to comfort her, but not too late to reveal his fear. Calder sealed the receipt. "The Crown follows evidence, not marital loyalty." "Marital loyalty?" Eleanor said. "There has been very little of that here." Julian absorbed the blow without answering. At dawn, the officers escorted them to the Crown Registry in the market town. The clerk opened Eleanor's deposit box before Calder, the magistrate, Julian, and 2 official witnesses. Inside lay 23 letters, tied with blue ribbon. Beneath them rested a leather dispatch pouch marked with Thomas Hartwell's military number. Calder opened Eleanor's sealed statement first. His expression changed as he read. "What does it say?" Julian asked. "That Thomas Hartwell discovered supplies purchased for wounded soldiers were being replaced with worthless substitutes. Medicine became coloured water. Flour was mixed with chalk. Blankets arrived already rotten." Eleanor looked at the false medicine bottle on the evidence table. The same method being used at Ravenshire. Calder nodded. Thomas believed the theft was organised through private estates in England. The stolen goods were sold abroad, while false receipts were submitted to the Crown. Julian turned toward Eleanor. The Ravenshire subsidy was not the target. It was a test. "A test of whether the old route still worked," she said. "Our grain stores, medicine accounts, and mill were being prepared to hide another shipment." Calder unfolded the final page. "The Duchess further states that her marriage gave the Duke of Ravenshire legal control over her residence and access to her correspondence. If he authorized seizure of the letters, she feared the same people who killed Thomas had gained influence over him." The room became silent. Julian stared at his signature on the search order. By choosing Cecily's warning over Eleanor's trust, he had made the statement appear true. "Open the letters," Eleanor said. Calder broke the ribbon. The first letters described missing army supplies. The next named officers and merchants Thomas suspected. Several passages referred to a woman identified only as E.H.C., who transferred payments through her husband's shipping company. Cecily's initials. Julian's chest tightened. The final letter had been written 2 days before Thomas died. "If anything happens to me, look for the cracked raven." Ravenshire was used before Julian inherited it. He knows nothing, but someone close to his family does. Julian reached into his pocket and removed the old wedding ring Eleanor had returned. The crack through the engraved raven caught the morning light. Where did this come from? He asked. Eleanor's gaze settled on the ring. It belonged to your mother. My mother died wearing her wedding band. She died wearing the replacement. Thomas found that one inside a military dispatch pouch. Julian turned the ring over. Why give it to me now? Because I believed you might finally ask the right question. And what question is that? Why would someone replace a duchess's wedding ring? Calder examined the cracked band. The inner surface contained a shallow groove where something had once been hidden. A few grains of blue sealing wax remained trapped inside it. The ring carried a message, he said. Eleanor nodded. Thomas believed Julian's father used it to move payment codes without carrying papers that could be discovered. Julian recoiled. My father was a crown minister. He was also deeply in debt before the war, Eleanor said. Thomas did not know whether he joined the scheme willingly or was blackmailed. Calder gathered the letters. The investigation now extends beyond the estate accounts. Ravenshire House and all associated property will be placed under Crown supervision. You cannot seize an entire estate based on a dead soldier's suspicions, Julian said. No, but we can seize it based on the Duke's destruction of a sealed storeroom, concealment of material evidence, and authorization of a search that recovered documents connecting his family to wartime fraud. Julian's face drained of colour. Every choice he had made to contain the scandal had enlarged it. Calder continued. Until the inquiry concludes, no rents may be collected and no estate funds released. Eleanor stepped forward. The tenants will lose their harvest wages. That is regrettable. It is dangerous. Many have no reserve after last winter. The Crown cannot release money from a compromised account. The Hartwell Trust is separate. Not anymore. Your use of it to pay Ravenshire obligations makes it relevant to the inquiry. Eleanor's independence vanished in a single sentence. The modest income she had built over 4 years was frozen alongside Julian's estate. The tenants she had protected would receive nothing, and she no longer possessed enough money to leave the district. Julian faced Calder. Use my private London property as security and release her funds. That property is also under review. Then take Ravenshire House. We already have. By afternoon, Crown officers had replaced the guards at every estate gate. Cecily was nowhere to be found. She had left Ravenshire before sunrise, taking the household keys, 2 horses, and the physician's locked travelling case. The injured steward provided the direction of her carriage, but not its destination. Eleanor stood in the burned mill as workers searched the ruins. The fire began in the records room, the foreman told her. Oil was poured beneath the shelves. Who entered before the fire? The physician, he said. Lady Cecily ordered him to inspect the medicine sack. Eleanor crouched beside the remains of the loading wall. One section of stone had collapsed outward, exposing a narrow cavity. Inside lay traces of white powder. She touched it carefully, then smelled her fingertip. Chalk. The foreman frowned. For mixing with flour? Yes, but they would need far more than this. Where would they keep it? Eleanor looked toward the river. The mill channel flowed beneath Ravenshire's northern grain warehouse before returning to the main stream. Heavy goods could be moved through the covered channel without appearing on any road. The false quays had not been made merely to enter the storerooms. They had been created to open the water gates beneath them. Eleanor ran outside. Find Mr. Calder. Tell him the stolen military supplies are not leaving by carriage. A bell began ringing from the northern warehouse. Once, twice, then 3 times the signal that the lower floodgate had been opened. Workers shouted as the river surged against the mill foundations. The foreman stared upstream. If that gate stays open, the warehouse will empty into the river. No, Eleanor said. It will do something worse. Beyond the trees, the first sacks appeared in the current. They were moving directly toward the village reservoir. If those sacks contain spoiled flour and medicine waste, the water will be poisoned. How long do we have? Eleanor watched the river carry the first torn sack around the bend. Less than 1 hour. Eleanor seized the mill bell rope and rang 4 sharp alarms. Close every village pump connected to the reservoir, she shouted. Send riders downstream. No one is to drink, cook, or water livestock from the river. The foreman dispatched 3 workers. Julian arrived with Calder moments later. Behind them, villagers were already gathering along the bank. The northern floodgate is open, Eleanor said. We must divert the current before it reaches the reservoir. Calder looked at the sacks moving downstream. Can the warehouse gate be closed? Not from this side. The mechanism is inside the lower chamber. Julian handed his coat to a servant. Then, I will enter it. The channel may already be flooded, Eleanor said. I know the passage. No, you know the estate map. The water route was altered last spring. His expression tightened. By you? After I warned you that the foundations were unstable. Another unopened letter. Julian no longer tried to defend himself. What do you need? Eleanor pointed toward 2 stone barriers beside the mill race. 20 men at the western spillway. Remove the timber braces and let the water flood the empty meadow. That meadow contains the Duke's winter hay, the steward said. Julian looked at the river, then at the cottages downstream. Destroy it. Workers ran toward the spillway. Eleanor tied a rope around her waist. Julian caught the other end. You are not entering that channel alone. You cannot order me to stay behind. I know. The answer stopped her. I am asking to go with you. For one moment, Eleanor saw the man Thomas had trusted, the officer who had crossed enemy fire to retrieve a wounded soldier. Then she remembered the search order, bearing his signature. You will follow my instructions, she said, immediately and without argument. Yes. They entered the warehouse through a side door. Water covered the lower stairs. Broken crates floated against the walls, while sacks spilled grey powder into the current. Eleanor descended first. The floodgate wheel stood at the far end of the chamber. Its chain had been fastened with a new iron lock. Julian waded toward it, but Eleanor pulled him back. There is something beneath the water. A thin wire stretched across the passage at knee height. One end disappeared behind a supporting post. Julian followed it with his eyes. An oil barrel had been wedged above the gate. If the wire were disturbed, the barrel would fall and strike a lantern left burning on the ledge. They intended to burn this warehouse as well, he said, and make the contamination appear accidental. Eleanor moved along the wall until she reached the wire's anchor. Using a nail from a broken crate, she released the tension and lowered the oil barrel safely. Julian smashed the lock with a hammer. Together, they turned the floodgate wheel. It refused to move. The pressure is too strong, he said. Wait for the western spillway. They heard a distant crack. The water around them dropped several inches as the river diverted into the meadow. Now, they pushed again. The wheel turned. Outside, the northern gate began to close. The flow weakened until the final sacks lodged against the iron bars. Julian leaned against the wall, breathing hard. Eleanor noticed blood running from his palm, where the wheel had torn his skin. You are injured. It is nothing. That is what Thomas always said. The words escaped before she could stop them. Julian looked at her. For a moment, the flooded chamber, the investigation, and Cecily's betrayal disappeared. There was only the grief that had joined them and then kept them apart. I should have listened to you on our wedding night, he said. Yes. I thought refusing to speak of him would make his death bearable. It only made me bear it alone. Julian lowered his gaze. I cannot undo that. No. She tore a strip from a ruined sack and wrapped his palm. The gesture was practical, not tender, but his breathing changed when her fingers touched his skin. Do not mistake kindness for forgiveness, she said. I will not. They left the warehouse together. By sunset, the contaminated water had been diverted from the reservoir. The meadow was ruined, along with enough hay to feed Ravenshire's horses through winter, but no villager had been poisoned. Calder placed the surviving sacks under guard. Each bore a military supply number hidden beneath a false Ravenshire label. The numbers matched those in Thomas's letters. This proves the wartime route was reopened, Calder said, but it does not identify who currently controls it. The physician can, Eleanor replied, if Cecily has not already silenced him. Eleanor examined the false label on one sack. A ridge of blue wax remained beneath its folded edge. This is the same wax found on the false medicine bottles, she said. Calder held it beside the wax recovered from Thomas's cracked ring. Both carried the same cloudy streaks. Powdered chalk, Eleanor said. It marked the stolen military supplies years ago, and someone has begun using it again. Julian looked toward the surviving sacks. Then whoever prepared these knew Thomas's investigation, and knew Ravenshire had once been part of the route. Calder sealed the label, the old ring, and one intact medicine bottle inside separate evidence packets. For the first time, Eleanor possessed a single physical trail connecting Thomas's death, the forged deliveries, and the attempt to poison the reservoir. Eleanor continued. But he will speak more freely to me than to a crown officer. Calder considered this. You are still under investigation, and yet I just prevented your principal evidence from poisoning 3 villages. He almost smiled. You may question him in my presence. No. Julian and Calder both looked at her. Eleanor stood straighter. I will assist the inquiry under written conditions. My trust must be released for tenant wages. Agnes Bell's cottage will be recognised as my separate residence. No search will occur without an independent witness, and the Duke will have no authority over my correspondence. Julian absorbed each demand. Calder asked, And if the Crown refuses, then you may investigate without the person who understands both Thomas's letters and Ravenshire's accounts. Julian spoke first. I accept every condition. This is not yours to grant, Eleanor said. I know, but where my consent is required, you have it. Calder agreed to submit the terms. Until approval arrived, Eleanor established a temporary office inside the village school. The schoolroom became her base, beyond Julian's control. Mill workers guarded the recovered sacks. Agnes recorded every person who entered, and the foreman signed a statement describing where the medicine bottles had been found. For the first time, Eleanor possessed evidence supported not by her husband's belief, but by witnesses who had chosen to trust her. That evening, Calder brought the sealed evidence to the village school. The wax from the medicine bottle, the grain sack, and Thomas's ring contains the same mixture, he said. Blue sealing wax and powdered chalk. Can it identify Cecily? Julian asked. Not by itself. Eleanor studied Thomas's final letter again. Look for the cracked raven. Thomas was not only describing your mother's ring, she said. He was identifying the mark used by the smuggling route. Agnes entered before Julian could answer. The injured steward has disappeared from the physician's room. Eleanor rose. Was he taken? No, he left after receiving this. Agnes handed her a folded note written in Julian's hand. Bring the brass stamp to the old chapel, and I will tell you why Thomas Hartwell had to die. Julian reached into his coat. The brass stamp was gone. He must have taken it while I helped him from the warehouse, Julian said. No, Eleanor replied. Someone made an injured man believe that stamp could answer the question he has carried since the mill burned. What question? Whether Thomas died because he discovered the Ravenshire route. Calder summoned 4 officers. Eleanor folded the false message. Cecily does not merely want the stamp destroyed. She wants the steward to lead her to whatever else Thomas left behind. Julian searched every pocket twice. I had the stamp when we left the warehouse. Who came near you afterward? Calder asked. Workers, officers, half the village. Eleanor examined the forged message. The handwriting resembled Julian's, but the ink had spread unevenly across the paper. This was written in haste, Calder said. No, Eleanor replied. It was written on damp paper. She held the note near the lamp. A pale line crossed its lower edge. This sheet was torn from an old medical parcel. The physician prepared it before he disappeared. Julian reached for his coat. The injured steward must have taken the stamp while I was helping him from the cart. He would not steal evidence that could clear me, Eleanor said. Someone convinced him the stamp would reveal who killed Thomas, and now he is walking into a trap. They rode toward the abandoned chapel with 4 Crown officers. Rain began before they reached the hill, turning the path to mud and forcing them to leave the carriage below. The chapel door stood open. Inside, the injured steward knelt before the altar. His hands were tied behind him, and the brass stamp lay on the floor several feet away. Do not touch it, Eleanor warned. Julian crossed to the steward and cut his restraints. Where is Cecily? The man coughed. She was here with Dr. Morrow. They wanted to know where the stationer's statement was kept. A sharp smell reached Eleanor. Lamp oil. She turned toward the entrance. Flames raced across the threshold. The chapel doors slammed shut from outside. Smoke climbed the walls as the officers struck the doors with their shoulders. Julian pulled Eleanor toward a narrow window, but iron bars covered it. The crypt passage, the steward gasped. Behind the altar, Julian shoved the altar aside. Beneath it, a stone panel had been left partly open. Take him down, Eleanor ordered. Calder and 2 officers carried the steward into the passage. Julian waited until Eleanor reached the opening. You first. The stamp. It is not worth your life. It connects Cecily to the forged evidence. Julian ran through the smoke seized the brass piece with his handkerchief, and returned as part of the roof collapsed. They descended into the crypt. The stone panel fell shut above them. The passage opened beyond the graveyard. Rain soaked Eleanor's dress as she emerged. Calder ordered 2 officers to search the road, but Cecily's carriage had already vanished. Julian unfolded his handkerchief. The stamp had broken beneath the falling timber. Its engraved face was crushed beyond recognition. Calder looked at the ruined object. Our strongest link to Lady Cecily is gone. We still have the stationer's order slip, Eleanor said. Calder wrapped the broken stamp inside Julian's scorched handkerchief. The engraved face is destroyed, he said. It can no longer prove whose initials it carried. Cecily had succeeded in eliminating the clearest object connecting her to the forged evidence. But the chapel fire had created a witness she had not expected. The injured steward pointed toward the road. Dr. Morrow lit the oil. Lady Cecily ordered him to leave me inside after I gave her the stamp. Will you repeat that before the magistrate? Calder asked. The man looked at Eleanor. She entered a burning mill to save me. I will repeat it before the king if necessary. The stamp was lost, but Eleanor's case no longer depended upon it alone. Calder placed Thomas's letters, the blue wax samples, and the steward's signed testimony under Crown Guard. This time, Cecily would not be given another opportunity to make the evidence disappear. The following morning, a crowd filled the market square. Cecily stood on the courthouse steps beside Dr. Morrow. She had returned voluntarily. Before Calder could arrest her, she announced that the Duke and Duchess of Ravenshire had attempted to frame her in order to conceal their own fraud. Dr. Morrow presented records showing that Eleanor had personally approved every false medicine delivery. He swore the Duchess had ordered him to replace expensive medicines with coloured water and hide the profits inside the eastern storeroom. Cecily then displayed a letter bearing Julian's signature. It promised her protection and marriage once Eleanor was legally disgraced. The crowd erupted. Eleanor looked at Julian. Did you write it? No. Did you ever promise to marry her? Julian's silence answered before his words did. Before Thomas died, he said. Years before I married you. Cecily raised her voice so the crowd could hear. The Duke concealed evidence because he feared his wife would expose our attachment. When his deception failed, they invented a conspiracy and accused me. The magistrate examined the letter. The seal is authentic. I did not write it, Julian said. But you hid the brass stamp after Lady Cecily spoke to you, Calder replied. Julian looked toward Eleanor. He understood what must happen. If he continued protecting his title, Cecily's story would remain plausible. Eleanor would stand beside him as a wife, helping her husband escape disgrace. To separate her innocence from his failures, he had to destroy his own defense. Julian stepped onto the courthouse stairs. The Duchess did not conceal the stamp, he announced. I did. The crowd fell silent. I broke a crown seal at Ravenshire House. I withheld evidence after Lady Cecily threatened my dead friend's reputation. I authorized the search of my wife's residence despite knowing the documents against her might have been forged. Cecily's confidence flickered. Julian continued. My wife warned me repeatedly about the estate accounts. I returned her letters unopened. I surrendered her household authority to Lady Cecily and gave her access to the rooms where false evidence was later discovered. The magistrate stared at him. You understand this admission may cost you control of Ravenshire and expose you to criminal charges. Yes. Eleanor watched Julian surrender the very things he had always placed above her, his authority, his reputation, and the illusion that his errors could remain private. He did not ask her to forgive him. He did not even look at her when the officers approached. Calder ordered Julian confined inside the courthouse until formal charges could be considered. Cecily smiled at Eleanor. Your husband has just confessed to everything required to condemn himself. Whatever happens to me, Ravenshire will never belong to either of you again. As Julian was led inside, Cecily pressed the stolen household keys into the magistrate's hand. I found these inside the Duchess's cottage, she said. One opens the chest of stolen money. Another opens the northern water gate. The magistrate turned toward Eleanor. Your Grace, you must also remain in custody. Eleanor looked at the keys. The silver ring contained 11 of them. When Julian had taken the household keys from her, there had been 12. The missing key was the smallest, the key Cecily had dismissed as belonging to a writing desk. But Eleanor knew what it opened. Thomas's cracked wedding ring had once carried messages. His final letter said to look for the cracked raven. Everyone had assumed he meant the ring itself. He had meant the key concealed inside it. Eleanor remembered the shallow groove within the old band and the blue wax trapped along its edge. The missing key had been sealed inside the ring before Thomas removed it. Cecily could imitate receipts, signatures, and household keys, but she could not know what a key opened if she had never possessed the original. Eleanor faced Calder. Announce a public examination of the Ravenshire accounts tomorrow. The original records are missing. That is why Cecily will attend. And if she refuses, she will not. Tell her the missing 12th key has been recovered, and that it opens the private ledger Thomas concealed before his death. Calder studied her. Does such a ledger exist? Eleanor looked at Cecily across the square. No, but only the person who murdered him will know that. By noon the next day, every bench inside Ravenshire's tenants' hall was occupied. Crown officers guarded the doors. Mill workers, servants, tenant representatives, and local merchants filled the room. The magistrate sat at the central table, with Calder beside him. Julian entered under armed escort. A murmur followed him across the hall. He wore no ducal sash and carried no sign of office. For the first time in his life, his title could not open a door or silence a whisper. Eleanor arrived moments later. She did not sit beside her husband. Agnes had placed a separate table near the front for her, along with Thomas's letters, copies of the frozen accounts, and a small locked box. Cecily entered last with Dr. Morrow. She smiled when she saw the box. Eleanor noticed. The magistrate struck the table. This examination concerns the theft of Crown subsidies, the falsification of medicine and grain deliveries, the destruction of the Northern Mill, and the alleged concealment of wartime correspondence. Cecily rose before she was called. It also concerns a wife who controlled every Ravenshire account and a husband who admits destroying evidence to protect her. I destroyed no evidence for my wife, Julian said. No? You entered the burning mill after her. You carried away the only receipt that survived. You then hid the brass stamp and allowed it to be destroyed in the chapel. Julian did not answer. The narrative was convincing because it contained pieces of truth. Eleanor stood. Lady Cecily claims the Duke and I acted together, yet 2 days before the mill burned, he removed my authority, gave her my keys, and permitted me to leave Ravenshire. A performance, Cecily replied. You needed the servants to believe you had quarrelled. Then why did the Duke sign a search order against me? To make your innocence appear more persuasive. Several people in the hall nodded. Cecily saw it and pressed harder. The Duchess controlled the relief funds. She signed the medicine receipts. She possessed Thomas Hartwell's letters. Every suspicious object appeared where she alone could interpret it. Eleanor waited until Cecily finished. You said I signed the medicine receipts. Dr. Morrow placed his ledger on the table. Here are 12 of them. Calder examined the pages. Each receipt bore Eleanor's name and a date matching a recorded delivery. Eleanor selected one. This states that 80 bottles were delivered to the Eastern storeroom on February 17th. They were, Morrow said. Who received them? You did. Before witnesses, Lady Cecily was present. Cecily gave a solemn nod. Eleanor turned toward Mrs. Mercer. Where was I on February 17th? The housekeeper rose from the second bench. At the northern village, a child had fallen through the frozen mill pond. For how long? From the morning of the 16th until late on the 18th, the roads were blocked by snow. The mill foreman and 6 tenants confirmed it. Dr. Morrow shifted in his chair. You signed the receipt afterward. Then why is the paper dated and witnessed as though I signed it during delivery? He had no answer. Eleanor placed 3 genuine estate receipts beside Morrow's ledger. My receipts contain 2 signatures, mine and that of the servant who counted the delivery. Yours contain only mine. Because you dismissed the servants before the bottles arrived. Which servants? Morrow glanced toward Cecily. Eleanor waited. He could not name one. Calder recorded the contradiction. Cecily rose again. A missing witness does not disprove the transfer. The stolen Crown money was found inside a chest bearing Eleanor Hartwell's initials. And you identified those initials before the chest was opened, Eleanor said. I had seen the chest previously. When? In the Eastern storeroom. The room you claimed never to have entered. Silence moved through the hall. Cecily's smile disappeared. I misspoke. No. You remembered an object you helped place there. That is an accusation without proof. Eleanor turned toward the injured steward, who now sat beside the mill foreman with his burned leg supported on a stool. Who carried the chest into the eastern storeroom? Dr. Morrow and 2 hired men. I saw them from the upper corridor. Morrow sprang to his feet. He is lying to protect her. Why did you lure him to the chapel? Calder asked. I did no such thing. Calder displayed the forged message. This note was written to imitate the Duke's hand and lure the steward to the old chapel. Dr. Morrow shifted in his chair. Eleanor noticed soot trapped beneath one of his fingernails. The chapel doors were fastened from outside, she said. The steward saw Dr. Morrow pour the oil, and Lady Cecily ordered him to leave an injured witness inside. Cecily laughed. The testimony of a frightened servant does not prove who forged the accounts. No, Eleanor said. That is why we brought the accounts. No, Eleanor said. The case is beneath this table. Every eye turned toward the locked box. Cecily went still. Eleanor removed a small key from her sleeve. The missing 12th key was concealed inside the cracked Ravenshire wedding ring. Thomas used it to lock away the private ledger before he died. Cecily's gaze followed the key. Where did you find the box? She asked. At Ravenshire. That is impossible. The answer came too quickly. Eleanor tilted her head. Why? Cecily recovered. Because Crown officers searched the house. I did not say the box came from the house. Cecily's fingers tightened around her gloves. Eleanor set the key beside the box. Perhaps you can tell us where Thomas hid it. I never met Thomas Hartwell. Then the location should mean nothing to you. It means nothing. Good. Eleanor faced the magistrate. I propose a simple test. Lady Cecily claims the missing key belonged to my writing desk. If that is true, it cannot open this box. Cecily smiled again. Then open it. I will. But first, Dr. Morrow must identify the blue wax used on the false medicine records. Calder placed 3 wax samples on the table. Morrow pointed to the darkest. That one. Eleanor turned to Cecily. Do you agree? I have no knowledge of sealing wax. That is strange. The stationer's surviving account book records your purchase of 4 pounds of blue wax. The order slip proving that claim was stolen. The slip was stolen. His bound account book remained in his shop. Calder opened the stationer's ledger and showed the payment entry to the magistrate. Cecily's face hardened. Eleanor placed Thomas's cracked wedding ring beside the wax samples. The wax inside this ring is more than 10 years old, yet it has the same unusual colour as the wax Lady Cecily purchased last month. Blue wax is hardly rare, Cecily said. No, but this wax contains powdered chalk. A murmur spread through the tenants. Eleanor continued. The same chalk found inside the burned mill. Thomas was not pointing us toward a document. He was pointing us toward the substance used to mark every shipment in the smuggling route. Cecily leaned toward Dr. Morrow. It was only a glance, but Calder saw it. Eleanor inserted the 12th key into the box. It did not turn. Cecily released a breath. You lied, she said. There is no ledger. No, Eleanor replied. There is not. The hall erupted. The magistrate struck the table for silence. Cecily stood triumphant. You have wasted this hearing on a childish trick. The trick was not the box, Eleanor said. It was the key. She lifted it for everyone to see. This is an ordinary writing desk key. The real 12th key remains missing. Cecily's triumph faltered. You told the magistrate that one of the keys found at my cottage opened the northern water gate, but the gate has never used a key. It is controlled by a wheel and chain. Julian looked toward the silver key ring resting among the evidence. Eleanor's voice remained calm. You knew a key was missing. You knew Thomas had concealed something. And when you saw this box, you knew it could not have come from Ravenshire House. Cecily stepped back. That proves nothing. Perhaps not. But your words do. Eleanor turned to Calder. Eleanor turned toward Calder. Bring in the carriage driver. The rear doors opened. The man who had driven Cecily away from Ravenshire entered under Crown Guard. He carried a small iron strongbox marked with the cracked raven. Cecily's face emptied of colour. She ordered me to take this from Ravenshire House, the driver said. Dr. Morrow later told me to throw it into the river. Calder placed the real 12th key into the lock. It turned. Inside lay Thomas Hartwell's private ledger, letters exchanged between Cecily and Dr. Morrow, and payment records sealed with the same blue wax found on the medicine bottles grain sacks, and cracked wedding ring. Eleanor faced the magistrate. The box on my table was the trap. This is the evidence Cecily tried to destroy. The carriage driver placed the iron strongbox on the magistrate's table. Cecily moved toward the nearest door. 2 Crown officers blocked her path. "You cannot detain me because a servant brought in a box," she said. "No," Eleanor replied, "but we can detain you for knowing what it contains." The driver removed his cap. "Lady Cecily ordered me to carry this from Ravenshire House to the old chapel. After the fire, Dr. Morrow told me to throw it into the river." "Why did you not?" Calder asked. "Her Grace saved my daughter during the winter fever. I would not help anyone hang her for a thief." He handed Calder the real 12th key. 3 witnesses watched as the inspector opened the strongbox. Inside lay Thomas Hartwell's private ledger, the stationer's stolen order slip, and bundles of letters exchanged between Cecily and Dr. Morrow. Payment codes had been sealed beneath strips of blue wax, mixed with chalk, the same substance found in the mill and inside the cracked wedding ring. The ledger traced the entire scheme. Years earlier, Julian's father had borrowed money from Cecily's first husband. When the debt became impossible to repay, Ravenshire's warehouses were used to hide stolen military goods. Thomas discovered the route and copied its payment records. Cecily's husband ordered Thomas's final patrol diverted into enemy fire. After both men died, Cecily inherited the remaining codes, but lost access to the Ravenshire estate. She returned when she learned Julian had married Thomas's sister. Eleanor had become the only obstacle between Cecily and the reopened smuggling route. Cecily needed her removed, her authority transferred, and her records discredited. Julian had provided all 3. He had handed Cecily the household keys. He had ignored Eleanor's warnings. He had broken the crown seal, concealed the brass stamp, and signed the search order that made Eleanor appear guilty. Cecily had not controlled him. She had simply relied upon the choices his pride made, predictable. Dr. Morrow reached for the ledger. Calder caught his wrist. Morrow's composure collapsed. "She promised me the estate position," he said. "She said the Duke would marry her once his wife was imprisoned." Cecily turned on him. "You forged the receipts. At your command. And you set the mill fire. You poured the oil." Their accusations filled the hall until the magistrate ordered both restrained. Cecily looked toward Julian. "You wanted me here. You gave me her keys. You told me she had never been a true wife to you." Julian did not hide from the charge. "I did." Eleanor's face remained calm, but the admission still wounded her. Julian stepped into the center of the hall. "Lady Cecily exploited my decisions, but she did not make them. I humiliated my wife publicly. I dismissed her work because acknowledging it would have required me to acknowledge how completely I had failed her." He faced the tenants and servants. "Every wage paid during the winter, every repaired Watergate, and every medicine account that protected your families was secured by Eleanor. I accepted the credit while refusing even to open her letters." Then he turned to Eleanor. "I married you to honor Thomas and behaved as though that made my neglect honorable. It did not. Duty placed you in my house. Cruelty made you alone inside it." The magistrate read the initial findings. Cecily and Dr. Morrow would be transferred to London for trial on charges of fraud, destruction of Crown property, attempted poisoning, arson, and conspiracy to suppress evidence connected to Thomas's death. The money recovered from their accounts would restore the stolen subsidy and rebuild the Northern Mill. The stationer entered protective custody until the trial. Thomas Hartwell's name was formally cleared. His final investigation would be recorded as the act that exposed a theft network operating for more than a decade. Eleanor closed her eyes when she heard the declaration. She had waited 4 years for someone to say that her brother had died, protecting others, not betraying them. Julian watched her grieve. This time, he did not interrupt or turn away. The Crown released the Hartwell Trust 3 weeks later. At Julian's request, control of the Northern Relief Fund passed into an independent trust governed by Eleanor and elected tenant representatives. He surrendered the income from his London property to replace the wages lost during the investigation. He also signed a formal separation agreement granting Eleanor her own residence, unrestricted correspondence, and complete authority over her personal funds. Ravenshire remained under Crown supervision. Julian retained his title, but lost control of the estate until every account had been examined. Society called it a humiliation. He He called it insufficient. Eleanor moved into a small manor near the rebuilt village school. She reopened the bookshop her father had once dreamed of owning and established an office where soldiers' families could challenge missing pensions and false supply records. Julian wrote to her once each week. He never asked her to return. His letters reported what he had done, which tenant payments had been restored, which servants had received public apologies, and which of Eleanor's old recommendations he had finally implemented. For 6 months, she sent no reply. Still, he wrote, on the first anniversary of the mill fire, Eleanor returned to Ravenshire for the opening of the new mill. Julian waited outside with the workers. He did not stand at the front. When the ceremony ended, he approached her, carrying the old silver ring of household keys. These belong to you, he said. No, his hand lowered. They belong to the woman who believed she had to hold your entire world together to earn a place inside it. Julian accepted the truth without protest. What should I do with them? Give each key to the person responsible for the room it opens. No household should depend upon one woman's exhaustion. Together, they distributed the keys among the housekeeper, steward, physician, mill foreman, and tenant treasurer. Only one remained the smallest writing desk key. Julian placed it in Eleanor's palm. What does this open? The desk where I kept the letters you never read. His voice broke slightly. I have read every one now. That does not change the years when you refused. I know. He removed her wedding ring from his pocket. Eleanor had not known he still carried it. I once believed loving you meant refusing to let you go, he said. Now I understand that if I love you, your freedom must matter more than what I want. He did not offer her the ring. He closed his hand around it and stepped back. Eleanor studied the man who had married her from duty, neglected her from grief, and betrayed her from pride. She also saw the man who had finally told the truth when truth cost him everything he valued. I am not ready to return, she said. I will not ask you to. I may never be. I know. She looked toward the new mill, where the wheel turned steadily in the river. Walk with me to the village. Hope crossed his face, but he did not reach for her. May I carry your books? Eleanor handed him half the stack. Only half. They walked side by side along the river road, not reconciled, not absolved, and no longer bound by an unwanted promise. At the village gate, Eleanor unlocked the door to her new bookshop with the final key. Julian stopped outside. For years, he had believed marriage gave him the right to decide which doors Eleanor entered, which rooms she governed, and which truths deserved to be heard. Now he waited without asking. Eleanor looked back at him. You may come in. She held the door open, but she did not surrender the key. Julian entered only because she had invited him. And at last, he understood the truth their marriage should have taught him from the beginning. Love was not the power to keep someone from leaving. It was becoming worthy of the freedom with which they chose to stay.